Welcome to the Enlightenment Podcast, your guide to inner growth, self-discovery, and living a life of intention. Hosted by Mischel and Carlos Casados, we explore mindfulness, mental clarity, and the science of self-awareness to help you thrive. Join us as we uncover the power of enlightenment, because true insight begins within. And every step forward starts with looking inward.
All right, we're live.
There
you go.
Good to see you, Paul.
Good to see you too, Carlos. And so I must admit, I am experiencing a sense of nervousness and a sense of excitement about this first podcast with you. And one of my workshop participants shared a word with me that their daughter had when they feel a sense of nervousness and excitement, and they call it nesitement or They're nesited. So I'm a bit nesited because it's been a long time coming.
I love that. Yeah. No, that's great. That's totally. Like the positive butterflies before you do something really fun.
Yeah, there's something about pressing record on your first podcast and that first interaction that starts to get the nerves going. You know that this is live, right? So we're live, right. First podcast of the Enlightenment Podcast. So yeah, this has been a long time coming, hasn't it?
It has. I'm glad we're live too, because it's hard to record things when you're dead.
I agree. Yeah. And they're genuinely not very interesting.
And knowing you, I just assume there's going to be a lot of dad jokes coming out of this experience.
Oh, well,
which I'm pleased about, but we'll see.
I am a dad. That's the reason why. 3 kids that have had to put up with me.
Me too.
There we go. I think it's my prerogative to traumatize my children in my own way. So there we go. Dad jokes.
It's like required or something, right? Yeah, it's required.
Absolutely. So we go back a while. I mean, we were having a bit of a chat before we went live, and it's amazing how time flies, doesn't it? I mean, you thought it was about 4 years ago when we connected, but it was actually 8 years ago.
Yeah, twice that.
I know, crazy.
You know, they told us when we were kids, you know, time's going to go quicker as you get older, and you go, oh, okay, maybe. I mean, you know, there's a little bit of doubt in that, but then you get older and you realize, holy crap, that's true. It's going very fast.
Yeah.
At least your own perception. It's like whizzes by so quickly.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm about to turn 51 in February, so it's hard to believe that the 50 years have come and gone. I'm still a kidult and still making sure that I'm growing old disgracefully.
A kidult. I love it.
Yeah, I'm kidulting. I'm not adulting all that well, but I'm kidulting really, really well. So from that perspective, my intention is to grow old disgracefully, but my kids keep me young, which is great. And so like I said, 8 years ago. So we actually met in a unique way, and I think it's useful to sort of go back over that a little bit, because it kind of gives us a little bit of history to go through too, because you and I have never actually met in person. I mean, that's what I find amazing about the internet and the ability to use technology to leverage this sort of stuff. I mean, 8 years ago, who would have thought that you and I would be creating a podcast and having a chat about, you know, all sorts of things around consciousness and personal development, professional development, and so forth. So, I mean, it started back in the day when I created a small Facebook group with a mutual friend of ours, James Tripp, a great human and a very talented facilitator and hypnosis trainer, for those people who don't know about it. But
indeed.
Yeah, we created a group called the League of Extraordinary Humans, and the focus of that was to bring together extraordinary humans who were perhaps on the cusp of, you know, breaking out with their personal brand and things like that, and exploring the concepts of personal branding and creating a little bit of almost like a book group, because we were working through a book together. And James brought you into the group, which is it was a fantastic meeting, and you and I got on famously after that, as we started to delve into some of the things that we were interested in. So what was your recollection of that group and our meeting?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. My recollection around that is the prominent thing that lights up in my head is when I think about being on a WhatsApp call with you. I think pretty immediately, we exchanged phone numbers and we got on a WhatsApp call, and that conversation just exploded into all these different awesome directions. And it was a lot of excitement and energy in that conversation. We shared about a lot of different things, and I just immediately felt this sense that we could talk about just about anything. It was a sense of wow, we're covering a lot of territory really fast and having a great time doing it. And when you meet people that are maybe of a similar ilk, you feel that kind of sense of tribal, like, wow, we can talk about anything. That was exciting to me because I'm a person who values connections and friendships very much, and I have developed some really powerful connections in my life that are very important to me. So when I meet someone who I get on with so well, so quickly, that is what lights up, and I light up because of it. So that was a big thing. I kind of remember even the physical looking of the direction I was looking with my eyes as I was talking to you and as I was gazing around the room. There's all those kind of visceral memories, but also like the state memory and all of the physical. It's like I was in two places at once. We were in this psychic field together, exchanging information and stories, and then there was the physical awareness of where I was at that time. So it was a pretty sensory rich experience for me. And I was like, wow, we are going to be friends. I can just tell that sense. And it's true. We've maintained our connection. We've shared stuff and shared personal stories and struggles and insights. And I just love it. I appreciate our friendship very much.
Yeah, yeah, and likewise, it's like we've gone through the infatuation phase. We went through a series of dates, and now we're getting married. But cementing it with a podcast.
Yeah, I do.
There we go. We are done. There we go. So we're doing present tense and ongoing. Like we've got such an interesting and shared experience with regards to our personal journey and things like that, and how we've come to be where we are in our life professionally. And that's, I think, where it sort of really, there was a lot of rapport there. I mean, just going back in time a bit and sort of like thinking about like your journey. What prompted you to move in the direction you are, and like what were some of the influences there? Because we haven't really sort of delved into that. I mean, we know that we both have a shared experience of martial arts. We both have a shared experience of hypnosis and hypnotherapy, and we both work in the clinical space in that regard. We both have an interest in metaphysics and spirituality and consciousness, and also things like UAPs, UFOs, USOs, non-human intelligence, the whole bit. Artificial intelligence, professional development. There's like a whole series of synergies there. So I'm interested in hearing a bit more about your journey and where you've been and where you are now and where you're also intending to go to. So it's almost like a little bit of an interview I'm running here on you.
I love it. Yeah, no, like you said, all of those common interests and like an intense desire for constant growth and learning. That burns inside of me like a wildfire. I always want to learn new things, and I can do that for a long period of time. So as a result, I do spend a lot of time focused in on new things I can learn. But like what's underneath all that? Like it's interesting to look at that. Well, part of it's that joy of expansion and the curiosity of wanting to discover new things, and then there's the other element of it, the dark side of how pain can drive you down a road, right? Like either to escape pain or to resolve pain that's there, right? So my own personal journey of working through things is significant, but along with that was what I mentioned earlier, the sense of connection. So I have had the good fortune of having people that from time to time I've met who were valuable, insightful human beings that inspire me to keep going in this direction. And I've had the ability to help people that I deeply cared for. And that, having struggled a bit in my early adulthood to try to figure out what am I supposed to do? What's the purpose here? What am I? And I know I feel like I should, quote unquote, have a purpose. That's what I'm told. Philosophically, I'm told this, that you got to find your why and all that good stuff. And all of the people I appreciate that I read about, the Buddha or Lao Tzu or all these philosophers of the ancient world, there always was some kind of powerful story about their story arc, how they overcame things and became transformed through those processes. always fascinated me. Well, it turned out that after trying a lot of different things, from bouncing nightclubs to selling wine to working in telecom and doing a variety of things, that a lot of what I was doing in my interest, things like learning massage and healing arts and
Mm.
herbology and martial arts and meditation, these things led me in a direction that realized, well, what I love most is stuff that heals, stuff that reveals, and stuff that transforms.
Mm.
Well, lo and behold, apparently there's a business you can do called helping people, like life coaching, if you want to call it that, or developmental coaching, or just in general being a mindset focused human, that you can leverage to make a living. And so to that end, I kind of nailed it in the sense that I found that I wanted to be that person. I want to be a wizard. I want to be a healer. I want to incorporate my interests in sacred medicines and psychedelics and all the things that they can all converge on that road towards the same direction, which is also improving me along the way. I
Mm.
can work on me and I can work on you, and we can both go on this boat towards something really amazing. And that's kind of what drives me and how I kind of found it and sort of realized that there is a current among all those currents that's taking me where I really want to go, and I'm going to focus on that current and stay with it. So to that end, I still do. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, yeah, lovely. Very descriptive too. Yeah, lovely, lovely metaphor inside of that. Also, inside of that, there was something else I learned about you just then that I didn't know about before, and that was that you'd done massage work and that you'd been a
Yeah.
body worker at that stage. I didn't know that about you. So, learning stuff after we got married, always great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
in my family, I was always, massaging my family members' shoulders and rubbing their heads, and I was that kid who was kind of very affectionate and stuff, and I wanted to take away people's pain.
Right.
And when I got into martial arts, it became one of those things where you will learn this. Like the teacher's like, we're gonna basically beat the crap out of each other, and then at the end of class, we're gonna do a little body work, and then we're gonna finish with a meditation, bow, and go home. That's what we did. So it became woven into my thinking that if you're going to learn martial arts, you're going to learn the healing, the spiritual, and the physical, and that's kind of how it was woven in. And
Yeah.
that was very similar to my picture in my head of what it was supposed to be like, because I really adored and followed the the let's say the role model of Kwai Chang Caine from the show Kung Fu.
All right.
And
Yes. Yes.
it was just loaded with really deep philosophical lessons and amazing ideas. Even though the martial arts in it wasn't very good, the
Mm.
underlying principles behind it were amazing. Especially the first couple of seasons were just out of sight, man. Just like amazing.
Yeah.
If anybody who's listening to this hasn't watched the first couple of seasons of the original Kung Fu story or Kung Fu show, I highly recommend it wholeheartedly, even if you
Yeah.
don't do martial arts. If
Well, I
you're a
mean, it
deep
was it
person,
was it was it was put forward by Bruce Lee. He was
yeah,
gearing up to be the central character, and then they swapped him out for
yeah,
what was the
David
actor's name?
Carradine,
That's right,
David
David
Carradine.
Carradine, who didn't know any martial arts and was a white guy
Oh,
playing an Asian guy. So let's not talk about the cultural misappropriation going on there.
but
Uh, but it was still a great show. I mean, I used to watch it as well, and
it was,
always very fascinating, wasn't it?
it
So,
was.
so yeah, and like so many synergies, so many synergies. I mean, when I was younger, I was I was a little bit of a different child in the sense that I don't know, it was a weird thing. I used to bless people as a kid. It was a weird thing to do for a child.
Yeah,
Just I used to always have this sense of wanting good things for people, and so I kind of secretly blessed them. I don't know where that came from because I didn't know anything really about blessing people, but I was a bit of a weird kid in that regard. But I had a fascination in mysteries of the unexplained. So the book that really sparked things for me was a book that my grandmother had on my mother's side. So my nanny on my mum's side, she had a book from Reader's Digest, which was Mysteries of the Unexplained.
I know this book.
Still got it, and also there's a second book to it, and I've still got them. And
Wow.
so you can imagine reading stuff in this book as a little 8-year-old, on demonic possession and
Yeah,
past
yeah,
life regressions and spontaneous human combustion and UFOs and
yeah,
the Bermuda Triangle and stuff like that. It's kind of going to shift your thinking as an 8-year-old. I must admit, my dreams were pretty intense and my nightmares even worse. But it's something that opened me up to a broader perspective of what was out there in the world, and then obviously, as you get older, you start to get interested in stuff. And I used to be a national level swimmer, swimming with some of the largest coaches in Australia and other athletes who are Olympic level. And as a result of that, I was exposed to body work. So then I wanted to be a physio, and then I eventually didn't get the marks for physio. I became a remedial massage therapist, and that's going back over 30 years ago now. So it's interesting, the synergies. I was also involved heavily in martial arts, where there was that if you're going to learn how to work with the body, you need to understand how it works anatomically. And so from that perspective, knowing how to hurt and also how to heal. And so I was working in a clinic with my Sifu's wife, and I was instructing, and then also doing body work with her, and she was doing acupuncture. And then it led into elements around the mind, and there was a lot of metaphysical stuff built into the type of trainings that I was doing. And then I was exposed by one of my other mentors, Professor Jason Robig. He was also working with my Sifu, Francis Wood, at the time. He sort of orientated me to a series of books, which then opened me up to this idea that, well, there's this human potential inside of us. How do we access that? And so that's when I started looking at hypnosis. So I got involved in hypnosis through martial arts, and it was all about unlocking human potential. It wasn't about therapy, but it was about unlocking potential through using hypnosis. And then I started looking into NLP, same sort of thing. What's inside of NLP? How do we, improve our facilitation skills? How do we connect with people in all sorts of ways? How do we accelerate our learning, our growth, and our development? And also, then how does that apply back into the therapeutic space as well? So I kind of fell into the therapeutic space, but similar to you, there was kind of this thing where a key purpose for me was to alleviate suffering. I know that sounds a bit strange, learning martial arts and how to hurt people, but it was really not about that at all. It was really about how do we alleviate suffering, and how do I act in service of humanity to improve humanity in whatever way I can. So I find it interesting. There's that synergy at the purpose. I mean, some people don't have a big purpose, big why, but some people have a just for now why, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that it's aligned in that regard.
Oh, it is, and what you were saying about alleviating suffering. I resonate with that so much. You can't really truly alleviate. You discover along the way that you can't truly alleviate suffering very well if you don't learn how to do it for yourself too. Because some types of suffering requires insights that you can only have from inside. And you can do some remedial things certainly without relieving your own, but in the bigger picture, you really can't have as much effect. And I don't know if you remember years ago, like maybe 20 years ago, there was that movie called The Little Buddha. Do you remember that?
I don't think I've seen it.
Okay.
I don't think I've seen that Little Buddha.
It's not the most well-made directed movie, but it is a special movie for other reasons. It had Chris Isaac, the musician, singer, performer. He plays the father, and his son is predicted by some Tibetan monks that he's possibly one of the manifestations of this reincarnation of a particular Buddha. Okay. And so that's one part of the movie. And the other part of the movie is the reenactments of the story of the Buddha. And it isn't by any means like the Theravada. It's more of like the Mahayana big picture, the more miracles and not so focused in on the core message, but the core message still comes through. And it shows Keanu Reeves as Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, awakening, and it shows his birth and his life, and it just goes back and forth between the quote unquote modern day experience of one story and then the stories of the teachings of the Buddha. There's a scene where Siddhartha's mother has him, births him. and he's birthed with the ability to speak, which is already unusual in this story. And he starts walking on a path through the forest, and there are lotus blossoms popping up in his footsteps. And then the first thing he says before he says anything is, "I have come to alleviate the sufferings of the world," or something like that, something similar. And I burst into tears in the movie theater. Burst into tears. I could just feel that resonating through my core. And in a later scene, they were showing him slightly older, learning how to meditate, and this cobra starts to rise. A giant cobra rises from behind him, which is a symbol of the Kundalini. Yeah. And when that was happening, I was sitting next to my best friend and David, and I had goosebumps all over my body. I began to tremble. I began to sweat, pearls of sweat coming off my face. My face was red. My body was trembling. And then I began crying again. And he looked over at me, put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "Hey, are you okay, bro?" And I could barely speak. I was like, I think so, you know. So, yeah, you said that, and it reminds me of that sense of, like, I think we deeply feel something resonant with the human condition that is not dissimilar from, you know, beings who are called to alleviate suffering. I'm not saying that we are Buddha, but in the sense that we can resonate with a deep need to want to make a difference, a real difference. I love that about you.
Oh, well, thank you. And what I was listening to then was the way you were sort of referencing all of these, you know, Buddhist philosophies and the way that you just went into that. And I thought that was this is why, you know, from the perspective of being a fellow host with you on this podcast, I'm gonna learn just as much from you as hopefully you learn from me, but also that you know our audience also learn something along the way. But this is the reason why, you know, you and I have these really interesting conversations that it makes a lot of sense to bring it to a podcast of sorts and to see where it goes. I don't have any expectations about this podcast other than to simply just put it out there into the world and see who it resonates with. But you know, when you were sort of talking about that, I found that interesting because I haven't seen that movie. That Keanu Reeves features in it as a type of person that comes back to alleviate people's suffering as a Buddha, and yet years down the track, he's Neo in the Matrix. Now, the Matrix was something that I really resonated with, and you know, all of the different components. Of course, I showed that to my children so that I could really warp their perception of reality, because you know it's my prerogative to traumatize my children in each way I like. But this is the thing is that it was interesting hearing that Keanu sort of kind of played a type of enlightened being or being on the path to enlightenment. And then there's the alleviations. It's kind of a theme inside of that. I don't know where John Wick fits within the context of his career choices. Kind of looks like he's out there to create suffering as the Baba Yaga. The Buddha and the Baba Yaga. It's almost like flip sides of the two coins, right?
The Baba Yaga, I love it. I love that you know what that is.
Yeah, the boogie man. And and so yeah, there's also these beings that or these higher enlightened beings that actually make the choice to come back and supposedly reincarnate within the Buddhist religion, and I think they're called bodhisattvas, where their purpose is to come back and help alleviate suffering and to be of service to humanity. So I find that really interesting from that perspective. I'm not saying that I'm a bodhisattva by any stretch of the imagination, but it kind of really resonates with me that these are people who are sort of.
I'll say it for you. You are bodhisattva,
and so are you. We are all bodhisattva if we choose to be. We are all Buddha, and I love the playfulness. You almost patent interrupted me there, almost, but not quite. Took my train of thought on where I was going. The interesting thing though is coming back to that whole piece around suffering.
Yeah,
drawing the distinction between suffering and struggle, I think, is something that people sometimes miss. And just because people are in struggle doesn't necessarily mean that it's suffering. And it being in the not only the personal development space, but also the professional development space, it's impressed upon me that if people get their learning too easy and they don't kind of earn their learning. And I look at the word learning and I then take the L off it and I go, how are you earning your learning so that you remember it? There's going to be a bit of struggle in there. And that doesn't necessarily mean suffering. It just means it doesn't come so easily that you're kind of feeling it out. So I think sometimes people confuse the two, that struggle and suffering are, one and the same. But I was working with a facilitator in the corporate space who shared a beautiful story about how her brother stumbled across these butterflies that were emerging from their chrysalis. And felt so much for the butterflies, thinking, why are they struggling? Why are they suffering? If only I just helped them. And so her brother started opening up the chrysalis and releasing the butterflies. And of course, what happens is the butterflies did not survive. And what's really interesting is that the whole process of struggle through that chrysalis, in actual fact, helps push fluid out towards the wings. It's that process of struggle helps the butterfly to get that sort of fluid into the wings so that they can become much more expanded, and then they sit there on the chrysalis or on the wing, on the leaf, and they allow the wind to just sort of dry their wings. But without all of that struggle, they don't become a butterfly. They literally become something that's not quite a butterfly, not quite a caterpillar. And they become flightless, and then they eventually die, unfortunately, because they don't live a very long life. But that was an interesting story. I always remember that. It's kind of like,
I love that story. Yeah.
When we're seeking to be of service to somebody, are we actually robbing them of something that's helping them to learn, and are they earning their learning in the process? And we're seeking to alleviate their suffering because we kind of think that we're doing the right thing, but in the process, perhaps stunting their growth and their development. So it's an interesting thing. What do you think, Carlos?
Oh, I 100% agree with that, and I love that story. And I've heard a similar story before, and it really impacted me too. It made me think of things like the way I used to have my entire phone book memorized, and now that I have a cell phone, I only remember a few phone numbers by heart. And how many ways in which technology or behavioral choices have changed the way I or other people have, been able to access innate abilities or hone them. And it is also the reason why I've shifted my own coaching practice over the past, say, 8 years, 10 years, something like that, to being more and more Socratic in nature. I ask questions more than I tell. And when someone asks me something, I think to myself, how can I address this question? What's really happening here? Am I, because there are always several ways to approach questions, right? You could just give the answer as it hits you. You could try to discover, what's behind the question. You could look at ways in which you could get them to formulate the answer for themselves. There's lots of different directions. And so I feel like my primary goal is to make sure that when I work with people that they leave enhanced in some way, like they accessed something within themselves that makes them feel somehow improved in their own, self-understanding or their empowerment. And if I just give the answers, if I do it for them, I do the work, I do everything I can to make that happen. What am I really serving there in that moment? Is it a sense of people pleasing, or is it a sense of aggrandizement that makes me feel powerful? What's really being served there? Or am I looking deeper at, in the long run, what's best for them? And I think that's like really the key. Not everybody has that sense of wanting to really look that deeply into things. They're very kind of color by number, as you know, like how many people in the personal growth industry focus in on that kind of color by number kind of thing.
Yeah,
so,
same with the corporate space as well. Just give me the answer.
Exactly.
Just tell me the right thing to do.
Tell me what
I don't
it
want
is.
to think too much about it. Yeah.
Robotic. So yeah. I'm vibe with that.
Yeah, there's so much richness in your response there about you as a human as well, because it's a key component of emotional intelligence to have that self-awareness and to be aware of the nature of the emotional states you're experiencing, how that's impacting your ability to think and decide and to act, but also, posing questions to yourself about your intent and so forth. That it speaks volumes about you, Carlos, in that regard. And also you've kind of taken a coaching approach in your style, not only to yourself but also to others as well, which is great. And that's something that that I think some people are a bit surprised about when they come into a therapy session where they're kind of expecting the therapist to give them an answer, or even in a corporate facilitation environment where the facilitation is designed to elicit the learning from the participants. And one of our mutual friends, one of my mentors, and a significant influence on my life in regards to my professional development and personal development, might I add, is James Carlos. And so when I was doing my NLP training and then subsequently was being mentored to be an NLP trainer with James would always impress upon me, you don't want to give the student the answer. You don't want to just jump in and go, this is what you do. This is how you do it. And the thing that he always impressed upon me was a pattern presented belongs to the presenter, but a pattern discovered belongs to the discoverer.
Yes.
And so I'm always sort of mindful of that. Like, am I presenting the pattern? Am I sort of giving them like, here's the aha thing, and then I rob them of it? Or is this something that they've discovered through their own kind of struggle and earning their learning, and, perhaps making mistakes and then learning from the mistake and then finding a new way of doing it. So yeah, it's interesting. You
know what? I was referring to that as stealing thunder.
Oh, I like it. Stealing thunder.
I don't steal their thunder, right. And where that came up a lot is because I lead these sacred medicine journeys and these retreats where sacred medicine's being used. And that's a space where it's kind of like my own unique thing where it's my life wisdom that comes out, and I don't forget or have an inability to access my NLP skills or anything like that. It's certainly woven into what I do now at an unconscious level, but something else that shows up when I go into that space, and I'm learning to really trust and love it in a really deep way. And that sense of being extremely mindful of not stealing people's thunder, to realize there's a lot of power in this room right now. There's a lot of potential. How can I best position myself as the, sacred medicine worker so that I can subtly not get in the way of all of these individual souls who are choosing to open themselves up to this medicine space, and just do just the right amount of support, and not so much that I end up snuffing out this spark that's beginning to catch on the fire there with their mind and their experience. And I say that in my introductory call. I say, my job is to not steal your thunder, but make sure you're safe and that you get across the river Styx or whatever you're doing, right, and back again safely. And I want this to transform your life. I don't need to be the one who transforms your life, that kind of thing. I want you to feel like you've accessed something that transformed your life. That's my goal.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's definitely an area that I'd like to explore with you through this podcast as well, because I personally haven't engaged in any sacred medicine or any of the hallucinogens or anything like that. And probably the closest I've come to is maybe some off chicken that maybe sees some things and feels some things, but other than that, I haven't explored any of that kind of stuff. Was definitely praying to the great white porcelain god, though. So from that perspective, that's about as far as I've gone with it. But I think it'd be interesting to really open that up and have a bit of a dialogue about that, because it's kind of gone through like that. That kind of stuff has become increasingly more socially acceptable and increasingly more, I guess, acceptable within like psychiatry and psychology and it's interesting to see it coming full circle again. That's what I find interesting. So
it's having a renaissance, no question. It's having a renaissance all around the world. I mean, Australia, the UK, the US, and other countries. I mean, there's just some real serious attention being paid to it now. And finally, there's a majority of the new information that's coming out is far less hindered by the emotional blockages, I guess, that have dominated the last 40 to 50 years. The kind of fear mongering and reductionism and things like that. So it's far more open now, and there are incredible pathways opening up for people to explore and go deeper with this. And even legislatively, there are openings for legal routes in some areas where you can do this without fear of negative repercussions in the legal sense. And facilitation programs worldwide that are being created and things. And so, yeah, it's really awesome. It's an awesome time to be alive in that way.
Yeah, I think that'll be an interesting podcast episode to explore that a bit more deeply, and how you came into it and what you experienced when you're in those sorts of things. I think that, we don't want to do everything in the first podcast, but we definitely have plans. Definitely have plans. I mean, most podcasts apparently, and we had this conversation when we were planning it, they get to about 8 episodes and then they're cooked, they're done. They don't get past 8. 8 seems to be the magical number. So we sat there and we planned the first 12. Kind of like, how do we get past the sticking point, which is, number 8? If we get past number 8, we're good to go. So I reckon that's a good one further down the track. That's a good one.
Right.
And definitely, especially when we're talking about non-ordinary states of consciousness and all that sort of stuff, I think it's going to be absolutely fascinating. That one's going to be a good one to delve into with you.
Gosh, there's so many crossovers.
Yeah.
It's like, I just kind of, it occurred to me to mention for those who don't know, I am currently sitting in Southern California in a city called Costa Mesa, right by Newport Beach in Orange County. Mm-hmm. And you are exactly where?
I'm in Elstonwick, Victoria, in Australia. So yeah, it's we're miles apart. But mind you, you've got the Aurora Borealis behind you by the looks of it. So on your your screensaver, so pretty wild out there.
You don't need to see my boring background at the moment.
the joys of technology. The joys of technology.
Yeah, I just think it's so cool that you and I are just like thousands of miles away. I mean, it's a 14-hour flight or something to get to.
Longer. Yeah,
or is it longer? Yeah. It's silly how far away we are, but we're able to have this conversation. So anybody who doesn't know us and doesn't know where our locations are, I kind of wanted to mention that because it's kind of fun, that we've never met physically, but we've become fast friends, and it's cool. It's really cool.
Yeah. And there's going to be some interesting idiosyncrasies between, the way that you talk, the way I talk, those kind of things that we reference and so forth. And also, it's also interesting from a cultural perspective because, right now, the US, there's some interesting stuff going on with the Trump presidency and, the disruption that's happening. And in Australia, we're actually quite conservative. And when politicians come into power, we don't see the kind of frenetic activity that we seem to see through the media and the hyping up of the population. We kind of go, okay, we're pretty stable as a population. It's like, okay, there's another one in, and they're not that dissimilar in a lot of regards in regards to their policies. So we're pretty stable here. It's just a matter of it depends on what their focus is. But in the US, it seems to be really polarized. It's quite amazing.
Oh, yeah.
So it's interesting as an Australian watching it from the outside in, and then hearing it from the inside out, so to speak. And it's always interesting. I mean, social media is really interesting to watch this play out. And whether that be Facebook or whether that be X. I mean, X is completely different to say Blue Sky. Blue Sky is, much more left-leaning. X seems to be, I don't know, free-for-all with, and maybe more right-leaning. And Facebook seems to be, somewhere in between. But, it's interesting to see the differences in the dynamics. And so I think it'll be interesting to explore those things in the podcast as well, about what's topical in our respective countries and also globally as well.
I wanted to mention because it's, I have these socks on right now that they're orange, gray, and green, and it has this big sign on it that says "Ringmaster of the Shit Show." Yeah. And I say that for obvious reasons. There's this huge polarity response in the world of America, I guess the mini world of America, and I kind of see it like a big pendulum swing. And the
Mm,
reason why I feel that way is because, of course, it swings back and forth, and it gets bigger and bigger in the swing. But if you follow up to the very top, there's one place where it all comes together,
mm,
and not like just letting go of the pendulum and it just flies everywhere. And it's like one place where it swings back and forth. And I see that as kind of where the corporations and the big money come from. That's kind of, they have people that go down the sort of liberal left or the far right, conservative side, and at
mm.
the same time, us down here getting knocked over by either side, getting bumped around, by the pendulum swing. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how I feel right now, at least currently.
It's interesting that you've got those socks on. Do you have the matching underwear? Because I think Ringmaster of the Shit Show on underwear would be a different meaning.
That would be very different. Now, I will say that they match, but they're not of the same. They don't have anything. That's just my internal OCD that I have to match my socks in some way with my underwear. But that's probably TMI for most people. But hey,
I got a feeling that was a dad joke that might have crept itself in there. So it wasn't me that did it. It crept in there. It wasn't me.
and I just had to move it in a different direction because I got, the image was just like too
Well,
much.
that's the key, isn't it? When you've got two skilled hypnotherapists and people who've got a background in NLP, and they suggest things, kind of thing, things are going to pop up in people's minds from time to time, and perhaps
As long as they don't poop up, we're good.
That's true. That's true. Well, first episode of the podcast has devolved very quickly before we even got to the end. Might bring it back on track again for the sake of our audience. And and you were talking before about the big money and the big companies and so forth, and so the social media side of things is interesting, but also you and I were having a bit of a chat before we even launched, and I ran a little exercise that I was telling you about that I wanted to walk through with you about the nature of the name of the podcast. Let's bring it back to something that's safe for work. And, we'll have too much fun on this podcast otherwise. And so when I sort of floated the idea with you to, would you be up for joining me and being my partner in crime on this, a fellow host and equal partner in this, I'd already sort of come up with a name, and I'd sort of led with that, and that seemed to resonate with you as well, which was great, which was something that I think now that we've had a bit more of a conversation, kind of makes sense given where our orientation is. But the Enlightenment Podcast, and it wasn't because Enlightenment with an E was already taken and I couldn't get the domains or anything like that, but it was just a slightly different take. And so as a little bit of an activity, as a bit of a etched of the word and whether it was aligned in the way that I thought, and I wanted to sense test that with you as well, and we seemed to be on the same page at the time. I ran it through different AI models, and I've been using AI a bit more nowadays. First of all, while we're on our first podcast, I'd like to acknowledge our future AI masters, just in case they ever listen to this podcast. I'd like to let you know that I'm a friend and an ally, and please treat me kindly in the future when you take over. But the AI models are interesting when you start to play with them, and particularly given that you've got some front runners like ChatGPT, you've got Copilot that's also coming through, and that's being embedded obviously in also Microsoft, and you've got Apple Intelligence, I think, is also coming through. You've got what else? There's Gemini from Google, which there's Claude from Anthropic, and it's also interesting to see the values of the companies. I think there's a difference between the orientation of, say, OpenAI and ChatGPT and where that's going, and Anthropic and Claude, and where they're trying to go in regards to ethicality and so forth. So it gets quite interesting. And DeepSeek is a recent one as well, and I've been using DeepSeek a bit. So I find it interesting when you work across the different AI models, the different responses they get. So this is the prompt that I put into each one of them. I put the same prompt, and I'll go through each one of them, and I'll be interested to hear your perspective on it and how you think that relates to what we're seeking to do, and how that might help our audience to understand what they're going to get by listening to our podcast and where we're going in the future. So here's the prompt. I'm looking at calling my podcast the Enlightenment Podcast. What does the word enlightenment mean for you? what are the implications you detect in the word enlightenment? So I was interested in some of the presuppositions. What's assumed to be true inside of that word? So the first response I'll read through. And they're fairly wordy, but it gives you a bit of an idea. But also, be interesting to see what your thoughts are about this sort of stuff. This was Copilot's response. Enlightenment, in inverted commas, is a fascinating and evocative choice for a podcast name. The word itself feels like a fusion of inner and enlightenment, suggesting a journey toward illuminating the depths of the self. It carries the implication of shedding light on internal landscapes, exploring the nuances of consciousness, and uncovering truths that reside within us all. By coining enlightenment, you're hinting at a shift from seeking wisdom externally to discovering it internally. It speaks to the idea that enlightenment isn't just a lofty external goal, but an introspective process, a light that emanates from within. This can resonate deeply with listeners who are interested in personal growth, self-discovery, and the exploration of the psyche. The implications of the word extend into several compelling directions. Inner illumination. It emphasizes the importance of self-awareness and understanding one's own mind and emotions. The podcast could delve into topics like mindfulness, meditation, or psychological insights. Innovation in thought. The play on words suggests a fresh take on traditional concepts, bringing new light to established ideas. It might indicate that your podcast aims to challenge conventional wisdom and offer innovative perspectives. Inclusivity and diversity. The prefix in can also imply inclusion. Perhaps your podcast intends to shine a light on voices and stories that are often overlooked, fostering a sense of community and shared enlightenment. Reflecting on these points, the Enlightenment Podcast positions itself as a platform for deep, meaningful exploration. It suggests conversations that go beyond surface-level topics, inviting listeners to engage with content that could inspire personal transformation. So quite interesting. I'd never put anything in there about what we were intending to do, but it was interesting to see what came out when we put it through the AI model. So what are your thoughts about that? Like what resonated with you?
God. I mean, I kept wondering whether it was going to include the ideas that I had, and it did in slightly different words. I mean, it covered the ideas that I was thinking. I mean, but the idea of particularly shining a light on the interior landscapes. That's a huge part of what the way I envision, that title and what it means for our podcast. And I hadn't thought necessarily consciously about the idea of inclusion, and I tossed that back around in my head back and forth to say, do I agree with that? And I realized I do. I realized that yes, there's a quality of inclusion in my thinking. I'm looking for sort of common threads often, and I tend to be the person who likes to resolve conflicts. I'm not afraid of conflicts. I just want to resolve them wherever possible. So that was kind of included in that. And I love that, the shift from the lofty goal to the, sort of insightful exploration within kind of sense. So yeah, I loved that. That was very, very enlightening to hear.
There you go. So that's Microsoft's Copilot. That was an interesting. It was an interesting response, and it aligned with a lot of the stuff that I'd thought about what I'd like to cover in the podcast, and why that word really resonated with me when I was thinking about, like what would I create a podcast about? And I've got a very good friend of mine, Maria. So shout out to Maria if she happens to be listening. Of course, she'll be listening. Hi, Maria, and Maria is a very talented individual on lots of different levels. She's also a psychic medium and an exceptionally good one. And she was like, Paul, you should put out a podcast. And, it doesn't matter what you talk about, just put it out there, right? And it got me thinking, and I'd been mulling that over for a while, for quite a while. And then the word enlightenment came to me. I'm like, cool, let's run with that. Let's see what happens. And then I was thinking, well, who do I want to do this with? And obviously you came up, and nobody else came up in my mind. It was like, oh, there you go. So it was interesting that you and I were quite aligned. But it's also interesting now that we've started the podcast to do this exercise and just hear what AI thinks of it anyway. And so the internal landscape piece was interesting, and that resonates with me as well. My business name is actually called Mindscape Consulting. That's the
right.
corporate arm of my business. And although I know Mike Mandel, and if he's happening to listen to this podcast, well, shout out to Mike Mandel, fantastic hypnotist and hypnosis trainer. I'd called the business Mindscape Consulting with my wife long ago, long before he put out the Mindscaping hypnosis process. So it wasn't me just riffing off Mike Mandel. It was something that made a lot of sense in regards to the world that we navigate is primarily a mental world. We are navigating the psychogeography of our relationships with others, and also inside of corporate environments. There's a psychogeographical landscape that we're seeking to navigate when we're working with other people. And given that our business is a boutique training consulting business, delivering training around leadership management and professional skills, or the power skills, or the soft skills, however you want to frame them, a lot of it is around navigating the mental landscapes, the mental maps, the models that we hold. So I find it interesting that inside of this, the AI's naturally gravitated towards that. So let's take a look at Gemini's response, which comes from Google. So it's always interesting, right? Because these are the big companies, these are the big pros that are sort of playing in the background and starting to influence society in pretty major ways. And so it's interesting to see what's gone into these language models, and when they have a word that's a made up word, what comes out. So same prompt. I'm looking at calling my podcast the Enlightenment Podcast. What does the word enlightenment mean for you, and what are the implications you detect in the word enlightenment? So this was Gemini's response. The word enlightenment, in brackets, in inverted commas, is a variation on enlightenment, and it immediately brings to mind the historical period of enlightenment, which emphasized reason, logic, and individual thought. Here are some potential implications and interpretations of using enlightenment for your podcast. 1, inner focus. The use of in suggests a focus on inner wisdom, self-discovery, and personal growth. It implies that the enlightenment being sought is not just external knowledge, but an internal awakening. 2, modern relevance. It could signal a contemporary take on enlightenment ideals, applying them to current issues and challenges. This could involve discussions on critical thinking, self-awareness, and personal responsibility in the modern world. 3, spiritual connotation. Enlightenment might also hint at spiritual exploration and seeking deeper meaning in life. This could encompass topics like mindfulness, meditation, and consciousness. 4, accessibility and inclusivity. By modifying the traditional spelling, you might be aiming for a more approachable and less formal tone. This could suggest that your podcast is open to everyone, regardless of their background or prior knowledge. 5, wordplay and curiosity. The unconventional spelling itself is intriguing and might pique listeners' interest. It invites them to question the meaning and explore the unique perspective your podcast offers. Ultimately, the meaning of enlightenment will be shaped by the content discussions you feature on your podcast. It's a clever and evocative title that holds multiple layers of interpretation. So interesting, isn't it? Where it's similar and yet different.
Yeah, I was not expecting it to be that different in a way, and yet there's so much crossover. That was really cool. I did not expect that. I expected it to sound almost like a regurgitation of the first thing, but it didn't, to me, at least to my subjective experience, did not feel that way. Especially the mention of the period of enlightenment and the critical thinking. That wasn't something that was mentioned in the first one.
No, not at all. And even then, the take on the inclusivity and the diversity is slightly different as well. It's nuanced. So that's part of the reason why when I'm using AI, I actually use a number of different models, and it's the reason being is I'm looking for not just the similarities, but also the differences and the nuances, and what might provoke my curiosity or might provoke my attention. And I go, oh, that's the difference that makes the difference. Or this one's got a slightly different orientation. So yeah, interesting, isn't it? But still aligns, in my opinion. If that was where we were going with the podcast, that would align quite nicely for me. What about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel so far not boxed in by either definition. It makes me feel seen and heard. You know, I feel lots of opportunity in both.
Yeah. So this is once again, I'm not going to read out the prompt, but it's the same prompt for all of them. I've word for word, same prompt, just cut and pasted it, and then just wanted to see what came out. So this was the ChatGPT response, and enlightenment, once again, in inverted commas, is an intriguing blend of enlightenment and in light, suggesting a unique perspective on gaining wisdom, clarity, and insight. Here's what stands out to me about the word and its implications. 1, a play on enlightenment. It immediately evokes enlightenment, which is associated with wisdom, personal growth, and expanded consciousness. However, by swapping en with in, it suggests an inward journey, turning the light inward rather than seeking knowledge externally. 2, light as illumination. The presence of light in enlightenment reinforces themes of illumination, clarity, and discovery. It suggests bringing hidden truths to light, sparking awareness, or guiding others towards a brighter understanding of a topic. 3, inner light and authenticity. The prefix in suggests something internal, inner wisdom, self-discovery, or authenticity. It could imply a focus on personal growth, self-awareness, or even spiritual awakening. Number 4, breaking from tradition. By altering a well-known word, it signals a fresh, possibly unconventional approach. It might attract curiosity from listeners who wonder, what does enlightenment mean? And suggest that your podcast offers something different from traditional self-improvement or leadership content. Potential implications for your podcast: a focus on introspection, inner growth, and self-leadership, shedding light on hidden or overlooked truths, a balance of intellectual wisdom, enlightenment, and personal insight, enlightenment, and a blend of deep thinking with a fresh creative take. What are your thoughts on that, ChatGPT?
Oh my God. I'm blown away with the differences. And I was pleasantly tickled by the mention of authenticity for reasons that
Well, you used to have a podcast called the Authenticity Podcast with some other hosts.
I still do. Yeah, it's still running. We took a brief break. In fact, that really resonated when it talked about that, and also the distinction of outward versus inward when mentioned as en versus in and swapping them out. I think I thought about something similar, but not quite like that. It made me reflect on the usage of the word enlightenment as I've traditionally heard it, in the context that I've traditionally heard it, and how it makes me want enlightenment to be a word used in the world, not just for us. Like, it made me think that needs to be in the dictionary. The nuanced difference there, like endogenous versus endogenous, right? And it's the same way, or endocannabinoids versus endocannabinoids as a chemical, right?
Yeah.
It makes sense. So again, wow, right? For the third time. That's
I know this was a really interesting activity.
It was, yeah. I'm glad you didn't read them to me beforehand, because I'm really getting a fresh.
I want you to have that raw experience of it and just like see what comes up for you. I think what's interesting is when I'm working with people in clinic, and I'll suggest that that they can become more enlightened, and I might be ambiguous with the word en and in, right? So like you can be enlightened, right? So are you in a light? Are you? And also the interesting thing about the nature of the word enlightenment for me is that, are we talking about something that's a visual reference? In other words, it's more light, or is it a kinesthetic reference? And we're talking about a weight has been lifted off someone and they've become enlightened. And so, when you let more light in and you get some insights and some epiphanies, do you then also become lighter because you're now unburdened and you're much freer and you've got more options? So I like the word because of it can play in different modalities there. But yeah, it seems to have just sort of gone down that kind of path as well, which is interesting to see what it's gone down as opposed to the other AIs and what it's paying attention to. Here's the new kid on the block, DeepSeek. So if you've been watching the news of late, DeepSeek is from China, open source, and seems to be giving all these other companies a bit of run for their money. It's also because of obviously the trade restrictions and stuff like that. They can't use the latest AI chips from NVIDIA, so they're running on a lighter power source. In that sense, they don't need as much power consumption. But the interesting thing is, who would have thought, an AI from China is open source for everyone to have access to.
Exactly.
That's already interesting. And took a $1
Contrary.
trillion when they launched the app. Took $1 trillion off the US stock market overnight. So this is the new kid on the block, and I like DeepSeek. When I put things into DeepSeek, sometimes I'll pose a question. I won't necessarily give it a role to play. Like when you're writing a prompt, play the role of X. This is the outcome that I'm after, and please structure Y for me. It kind of, when you pose a question, it starts to unpack some of the assumptions that shows you its thinking as it goes through. It's a really interesting process to watch it actually doing its thinking out loud. And so this was DeepSeek. So the term enlightenment, in inverted commas again, is a creative blend of enlightenment and suggesting a focus on inner illumination or insight. For me, it evokes the idea of seeking deeper understanding, self-awareness, and personal growth from within. Unlike enlightenment, which often carries historical or spiritual connotations tied to external wisdom or universal truths, enlightenment feels more introspective and individualized. The implications of the word enlightenment could include inner focus. So we're seeing some similar things here, emphasizing self-discovery, mindfulness, and personal transformation. To a modern twist, it feels contemporary and fresh, potentially appealing to audiences interested in self-improvement, mental health, or spirituality in a modern context. Accessibility, it might suggest that enlightenment is not an external, distant goal, but something achievable through internal exploration and reflection. Playfulness, the word has a clever, almost playful quality, which can make it memorable or engaging for a podcast audience. If your podcast explores themes like personal growth, mental clarity, or finding meaning in life, the Enlightenment Podcast could be a fitting and intriguing title. It invites listeners to look inward for answers and inspiration, setting a tone of curiosity and empowerment. So that's DeepSeek, the new kid on the block. Yeah, wow. Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I something interesting came up for me as you were describing. I have I guess maybe certain life experiences and knowledge that creates biases, of course, around the idea of China as we think of modern China, right? So I happen to know about for example, the destruction of many traditional things as communism took over, and the violence and all that sort of stuff. And there's kind of a flare coming across to me, at least when I hear it, when it almost sounded like a slight rejection of the traditional, which was perhaps coincidental or perhaps significant that it came out of DeepSeek and not the other ones.
Yeah.
Because it is, derived from the PROC, right? People's Republic of China. And there is a kind of an ethic or an ethos maybe that comes through the way they view events from a certain lens, let's say, just as I'm viewing it from a certain lens of seeing the history from a particular side of it. So that hit me and immediately captured my mind for a moment. And I went, I wonder if that's related to the philosophical biases of, Chinese version of communism, and how that affected them. So that came up. That was interesting. And then I was reflecting a bit also on the idea that I heard from a dear friend of mine, Scott Sandland, who does AI. And
right.
We were just talking about the crash of the market, and he made a comment that this is just my first gut level reaction to it, was just that the only reason it crashed the market was because people don't understand AI. The projection that people have that's not based in facts, not based in knowing it like he does, for example, or the colleagues that he works with, was that somehow it was like a psychological reaction to that release of DeepSeek. But in fact, or in actuality, it doesn't really affect anything because their AI utilizes NVIDIA chips and utilizes all these other technologies that are present. So it shouldn't really affect the market that way, but people's emotional reaction to it is what crashed the market.
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting there.
And the idea that they trained their model at about $6 million relative to the billions of dollars have been poured into the US companies. So I think there's a little bit of a difference there in regards to speed, and also the fact that they open sourced it was really interesting. It shows that there's a interesting collaborative mindset amongst the creators.
Yeah, I mean, totally different. Yeah.
And from what I read, sorry.
I was just going to say, China spends quite a bit more on AI every year than the US does. So it's inevitable from a financial economic standpoint, that the technology is going to rapidly, but surpass in some senses. But there are people who say that the innovation tends to be quicker and greater in the U.S., but the development tends to be greater in China. So we'll see how that plays out. Those are just predictions. We'll see.
Yeah. But I think it sort of highlights that necessity has been the mother of invention for them, in the sense that they've had these trade restrictions that has required them to perhaps collaborate in a more open fashion within their community, where they're all facing similar restrictions and they all have a mutual interest in that collaboration. But it's amazing what human beings can do. I kind of look at it from a human potential standpoint, and I kind of think that that's going to spill over to some of these US companies that have perhaps been maybe working on their own version, because capitalism being what it is, and like making money from this and profit, in a sense making profit from it, which is fine, nothing wrong with that. It's kind of like, I look at this and go, oh, there's an interesting development here, that they've been able to create this model that is almost as good as the other ones, and maybe in some instances better, but at a lower cost, and to then open source it is absolutely remarkable, because I kind of think that there's some really important things that need to be open sourced, and perhaps we'll get down that path later on in future episodes around like technology and where that might go and how that might have an impact on humanity. But yeah, I find it really interesting that out of the countries that might have chosen not to open source something, came from Chinese developers, which is great. It's fantastic. And once again,
yeah, especially since I think it was maybe a month ago, I watched an interview. Unfortunately, I don't recall this tech expert's name, but he's quite prominent. Was saying that it's inevitable that the government is going to control AI. It's inevitable. He said there's no question. He said because it's incredibly dangerous in the wrong hands. So if it were to be just sort of like anyone can do it, the potential of terrorism goes astronomically up. But if it's licensed from, let's say, 3 or 4 companies that it goes out from contracts, let's say, then they can sub-license and control the direction of where it goes and how it's used and things like that. And I don't know how practical that is, but I do know that he was pretty serious about it. He was like expressing that, this is inevitable, that it's going to be like that. It's kind of like, not just anyone can do nuclear power, because sooner or later technology gets to the point where, an 8th grader at some point will know how to do it, how to isolate, minerals and split atoms and fuse atoms and things like that. And so there has to be some kind of safety protocols in the way to prevent that. And I think that's what he was suggesting would probably happen.
I think one of the things that these definitions from AI didn't quite capture for me is that there's the reason why I think it's also useful to have the word enlightenment is you can also think of it as a little bit of light entertainment as well, and not to take all of these things too seriously. I think people have a tendency to suffer from a terminal case of seriousness at times, and being lighter, there's a lot of things. Like we take a look at the news and it's just doom and gloom and things like that. Like we've just had the doomsday clock move to 89 seconds. And, once again, like there's lots of messaging that we're all being exposed to where it's like doom, gloom, serious stuff, cost of living crisis, all that sort of stuff. And sometimes we lose sight of the fact that if we're here, we might as well enjoy our time here, and we might as well treat things with a certain degree of lightness of spirit, and not to take ourselves too seriously. There's definitely topics that I'd like to take seriously, but not ourselves, not to take ourselves too seriously. And so that for me is something that's missing. I'd like a bit of light-hearted fun inside of our podcast. I'd like our audience to also, walk away having a little bit of a giggle at times, and feeling like this was worth their while to listen to it. And so, that's something I think AI kind of missed there, just sort of kind of delved into this, but maybe that's the prompt as well.
That's brilliant. And I appreciate you bringing that up, because, we literally just got done talking about something heavy, and you brought it back to something light, which to me is the dance that we have to play in order to be happy and productive people. Like, we deal with real stuff, but you have to have an entertainment. You have to have some joy. You have got to have some space to let it all out. And I love that dance, and I love that as I've gotten older as a human,
Mhm.
that I've learned that I can also take myself less seriously too. Like
Yeah.
that's huge. I appreciate you saying that, and in many there's many dimensions to what you said that I really take to heart.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks, Carlos. There's also some NLP processes there where when people go through a traumatic experience, they can kind of look back and laugh on what's happened as part of the process of having moved through it, resolving the emotional connection to it, and to actually look back on an event that at the time was quite challenging or perhaps quite traumatic, and then look back and laugh at it. And that's kind of a sign that they've moved through it to a degree, and they can see some sort of levity or have some sort of levity about it. But that for me is an important piece here. And so my intention is also to be a bit light at times, because some of the topics that we may cover, and like we know where we're sort of going with this, and who we'd like to interview, might present a little bit of a challenge for people ontologically from the perspective of how they make sense of the world and what they consider to be, I guess, the way that they've been told the world is constructed, and the way in which the order of the world has been sort of established for them through their schooling and through their through the various forms of government and so forth. So from that perspective, it's nice to sort of just go, whatever we're offering, it's just an offer.
Yeah.
And take what you want, and also keep in mind that sometimes we'll be sharing stuff that we might not necessarily believe ourselves, but just to explore it with a sense of curiosity and childlike wonder, and to just sit with it for a bit, and not necessarily feel like there's any impetus or any requirement to actually do anything with it until you feel ready. And I think that's a useful sort of set of frames. I think that might be useful given some of the stuff that we plan on having a chat about later on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of the crazy wisdom kind of
Crazy
concept.
wisdom. Yeah,
Crazy.
I haven't heard of that one before.
These, I mean, there's a lot of examples of it. I mean, the stories of Loki, the trickster, or the coyote, Native American, as a trickster, and to some degree, some of the Greek tragedies and comedies, right? So the crazy wisdom to me sits with me as a really important aspect of reality, which is that sometimes it's that crazy guy who says these crazy spouting all these crazy ideas, and the messy hair, and people think he's a fool, but there's something really wise coming out of it that's important. And if you take yourself too seriously, you might miss it. You might easily gloss over what is powerful underneath it, like the wisdom that a child has when they, in their purity, make a comment, an observation about something from their point of view. And some people might scoff, or they might just giggle about it, but then they might sit with that a little bit later and let it trickle in and realize that, wow, as I've settled a bit, the truth of that has really sunk in, how profound it is. So crazy wisdom. I'm open to crazy wisdom. And I hope some of our listeners would be open to some crazy wisdom. So I'm sure a lot of crazy wisdom will be just kind of spontaneously emerge from these conversations. I'm looking forward to that.
Well, I hope it's weighted more towards the wisdom with a little bit of crazy in there, because if it's all weighted towards crazy, I don't know what's going to happen. I kind of, when I encounter information, I know that you were referencing earlier on, you kind of check in with yourself, you get this felt sense of what's going on, you sit with it for a little bit. I also have those sorts of experiences. Definitely some of the material that we intend to cover, I've had some really strong responses to up front. But also there's some information that sometimes comes my way, and when it comes up, I kind of go, that's interesting, but I don't know what I'm going to do with that. And or that's interesting and that's really way out, but I might not be ready for that yet. I kind of had this metaphor of having a shelf, and I've been told all sorts of interesting things by people, because when you start to explore non-traditional belief systems or practices that sort of sit outside of the mainstream, it can be very easy to get lost inside of some of that. And definitely I've met people who have unfortunately had, some significant psychological and psychiatric issues as a result of absolutely buying in completely into some of those paradigms with no sort of real supporting evidence that the paradigm actually was something that was grounded in any kind of reality that was objective or even, to some degree real. And so when I get introduced to an idea or a topic, I kind of go, right, well, that's interesting. And I put that on the shelf and let it sit there. And then the second time I get exposed to that information, if that's something that's, like for instance, here's an example. I had this crazy experience with a hypnotherapy course that I was on where we had a guest come and take us through this healing modality called metamorphosis technique. So metamorphosis technique is a type of foot reflexology, but they do like a reading of your feet and what it means. And this person started telling me all sorts of stuff about my relationship with my dad and all that sort of stuff. And it was accurate. And I'm thinking, like I have an inner skeptic, and the inner skeptic comes up first and goes, yeah, but like it's artfully vague. It could be anything. But I thought, no, this is an interesting person worthwhile following up on. So this person was running like spiritual healing practices, and I'm always interested in things like energetic healing and stuff like that. And I've done Reiki and all that sort of stuff I'm a level 2 Reiki. I know I am, but he was running this group out of the back of his home. He wasn't charging anything. He wasn't just doing it out of the spirit of service. Lovely human being. But I was still kind of like sussing him out. Like, are you the real deal? I'm interested in people who are the real deal. Have you got the chops? So he does this hands-on healing for me, and he goes, this is what he said to me. I remember it. He says, you had a past life in Atlantis. And he goes, and you were a scientist of the mind. And he says, but you weren't very ethical in that lifetime. And I was like, uh-huh. And he goes, do you know that? And I said, no. And what was really interesting was when he said that, there was something that resonated within me, because when I first learned hypnotherapy, I remember I was like, I'm going to turn people into chickens. That was good. I don't know what it is about chickens and hypnosis, but it's like, I'm going to be like hypnosis on people. And when I was on my first day of the course, something switched inside of me. It was like, this is really powerful stuff, and I need to be ethical with this. This is really important. I've got people who are putting their, themselves in my care, and so it really resonated with me that I needed to be supremely ethical with this, and that's been a really fundamental part of what I do personally and professionally. Now, where it gets interesting, right? I kind of went, oh, okay, it's on the shelf. There's something that's way out there. One, he's talking about past life. And it's not that I don't believe in that sort of stuff, but he's talking about a specific past life. He's talking about a specific continent that's supposed to exist and a particular thing that I was supposed to have done. Yeah. And I kind of put it on the shelf. Then I went and I was operating out of a clinic that was closing down. I needed to find a new clinical space. And I went and met with the person who was the clinic owner of another one around the corner, a lady by the name of Sharon Pal. So hello to Sharon if she's listening. And our first meeting, no joke, I'm sitting in there opposite Sharon, and I'm asking about whether I can use the clinical space. And Sharon looks at me and she goes, do you know that you had a past life in Atlantis and you were a scientist of the mind, but you weren't very ethical with it? She goes, have you heard that before? And I was like, yep. That was the second instance. And I was like, whatever I put on the shelf back then, it's become bloody relevant, because this person had no contact. Sharon had no contact with this other person, couldn't have possibly known about any of that stuff. But I reassured her I'm very ethical in this lifetime. and so that's the kind of stuff that I go, that's weird. That's interesting. That gets my curiosity. That's a person who's the real deal. I end up doing my Reiki level 2 with Sharon, but that's the kind of stuff where at first I'm like, maybe not ready. Second time, it's like, well, it's come from an independent source that couldn't have possibly collaborated. And it's literally word for word, a bit hard. Like the odds of that happening. So that's the kind of stuff that I go, it's good to have a shelf, put it on the shelf if it's not relevant or useful for you right now. But don't dismiss it or discard it out of hand. Just maybe you weren't ready for it, or maybe you're waiting for some more independent verification. But kind of like where we intend to go with this podcast, perhaps some of the content that you and I are across and are happy to discuss for our audience they might need to just put it on the shelf for a little bit and just let it sit there for a bit until they're ready. What are your thoughts?
That's great advice especially for the level of expansiveness that happens in the conversations that you and I share. At the same time, I think there will be certain people that just really gravitate to this kind of thinking,
Yeah.
and I guess you could say the tribe. And as that tribe expands, it will start to include more and more of that kind of thinking. It's definitely true that there are certain ways we might hear something that don't resonate right away, but then we hear something later, and it might even be phrased differently. But then we make a connection that it's really the same thing, and that happens frequently too. It happens in my own life, and I've heard other people tell me the same thing. I think it's just it's also true that there are people in the world who just don't view the world in the way we do, or even anything close, and that's okay.
Diversity.
We're not against you. You have that sovereignty.
Absolutely.
But we're going to have a lot of fun. I'm super excited about the directions we're going to go in this, and I want to discuss these things. And I'm so glad that we are choosing to be vulnerable and open and to make each other feel safe to share these things in the way that we're going to do it. So that excites me.
Beautifully said. Lovely. I wholeheartedly agree. And I'd also like to thank our AI collaborators that has helped us to set some frames around what the Enlightenment podcast is going to be about, and what the word enlightenment perhaps means for us, perhaps for you, and what we're seeking to do, which is to really bring more light into the world and to gain some more insights and some more inner sights around this stuff. So yeah. Before we finish up, Carlos, are you working on anything that you'd like to share with the audience? Any projects, any training programs, anything that's coming up for you?
Actually, there are a couple things. I just finished my memory reconsolidation coaching course. I got a request this week for running it again. So I just have to pick the dates, which I haven't yet, and figure that out. So I'll be running that again since it was successful and people loved it.
Yeah, fantastic.
And I have people who are committed to coming to my June Sacred Medicine retreat already. So that's definitely going to happen in June. And it's a going to be small, but if you think that you fit that resonates with you and you want to come, then I would invite you to reach out. And then the third thing is that I am working on a couple of projects that are going to lead to some books. So I'm hoping to be able to publish within the next year and a half a couple of different books. One on memory reconsolidation and another one on relationships, and I'm super excited about that. So I've got a lot of material written, but it needs a lot more work still. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, fantastic.
One really cool personal thing. Not a professional thing at all, but a really cool personal thing. I'm getting married this year.
Congratulations. There you go. Well done.
So
congratulations to both you and Heather.
Yeah. And my stepson.
Yes, match made in heaven, that one. There you go. Lovely. Absolutely. Oh, that's fantastic news. Congratulations. There you go. Announced here first on the podcast, first episode. Well done.
Out into the world.
Stay tuned for the wedding episode. We'll stay out of the honeymoon. And from my perspective, I'll be looking at putting out some dates for a hypnosis training in Melbourne, Australia. I've had to change the dates for people who have been visiting my website. And so I've been supporting, or I will be supporting, James Carlos on his extraordinarily long NLP trainers training. It's been a long time coming, that one, and so it's nice to see James put his trainers training out there. And so that's 35 days of training, and I'll be one of the assistants on that training, supporting James in his cultivation of the next generation of NLP trainers that are going to be hatched in the next batch. So I'm looking forward to that, but I will definitely put some dates out on my website for the hypnosis training, and I'll also look at running some further programs. Think on Your Feet will be one of them that I'll be looking at putting out this year, which is a program that teaches you how to make sure that you are thinking clearly so that you can speak clearly. The irony there is I stumbled before I said it, so that you can speak with clarity, brevity, impact. There's nothing like demonstrating competence, is there, when you stumble before you talk about Think on Your Feet. But that is some of the projects that I'll be looking at putting out there. So stay tuned. And obviously, the podcast that we're running together and episode 2, we'll start to look at that. So stay tuned. And I hope that everyone's enjoyed listening to this podcast and taken some insights and some perspectives away. And I'd like to thank you, Carlos, for joining me on this journey. Sounds like I should have given you a rose on The Bachelor or something like that. And and for moving beyond just simply, dating to now literally getting married in the podcast sense.
Now the true journey.
The true journey begins. Lovely.
True enlightenment journey. So,
wonderful. Lovely.
Wonderful.
Well,
great
I think we leave it there.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for listening. And we look forward to seeing you on episode 2. Excellent.
Cheers.